Welcome to Fireside Chats with Erin, the reboot. I'm Erin Gowerluck, President of the Canada Grains Council and your host. This podcast serves as a platform for us to highlight grain sector priorities that reflect the Council's work here at home and around the world. Together, we will explore issues and ideas with policymakers and industry influencers. Speaking of which, today I'm pleased to be joined by Nadia Theodore, Ambassador of Canada to the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Theodore began her public service career at the Canada Revenue Agency in 2000. She subsequently worked with the Department of the Solicitor General, and she joined International Trade Canada in 2004. At headquarters, she served as Director of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Negotiations, Director of the Secretariat for the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Minister of International Trade. Abroad, she served at the Permanent Mission in Geneva from 2009 to 2012, and as Consul General in Atlanta from 2017 to 2020. More recently, she worked as a Senior Vice President at Maple Leaf Foods, a Canadian consumer packaged goods company, and the world's first major carbon-neutral food company. Ambassador Theodore, thank you for stopping by for a fireside chat.
Thank you for having me, Erin. It's a pleasure to be here.
One of my first questions, I was going to ask you what it's been like to settle into your new home in Geneva with your family. And in reading your bio, I discovered this is not the first time that Geneva has been home for you, but I wonder if maybe this is the first time that you've had a family in tow. Tell me a bit about what it's been like to settle into your new home over the last couple of years.
It is indeed not my first tour in Geneva. But I think that when you think about transitions, right? I think, what do they say? There are two most stressful things in life, and one of them is moving. So transitions, I think, are always filled with a bit of wonderful and a bit of difficult, a bit of challenging. And I think I'm definitely no different in that regard. But it's great to be back in Geneva for the second time around, this time with a family. Yeah, and it's great to be. It's great, obviously, fantastic, to serve Canada, to represent Canada abroad. But like anything, it's these jobs are tough, right? I mean, you're away from your family quite a bit, and in particular, if you're a caregiver, and in my case, a mom, that presents its own challenges, and you have to kind of work through that. But I'm at the 18th month mark, so I feel like I've gotten the groove now, and so I'm well ensconced.
You're finding your stride.
Well, yeah.
From one mom to another, I appreciate the perspective. It is challenging, but very rewarding, and we appreciate your work in this role. I had an opportunity, my chair and I, Pierre Patel, Chair of Canada Grains Council, we had a chance to meet with you in Geneva this fall. Appreciate the conversation there. And we talked a bit about, when we saw you, we talked a bit about some of the conversations that we were having with ag sector stakeholders when we were setting up meetings in Brussels and Paris. And I don't think that we had a single conversation where the topic around the European Union and their agri-environmental policies wasn't raised. And I think there was some significant concern from ag sector stakeholders around the impact that these policies are going to have on both productivity and on trade flows. Now, I recognize since we met last, there have been a couple of recent changes. We saw, for example, the renewal of glyphosate in the EU for a period of another 10 years. We saw the rejection by the European Parliament of the Sustainable Use Regulation, which was the regulation that included a reduction in the use and risk of pesticides by 50%. But we're still faced with a regulation on deforestation-free products. And for the first time ever, we have the revocation of pesticide maximum residue limits based solely on global environmental concerns. So can you talk a bit about the EU's use of multilateral forums like the WTO and their agri-environmental agenda, and whether or not recent events have influenced their approach in any way, and what impact do you think this could have on trade, and in particular, our ability to move food from areas of abundance to areas of need?
Well, first, let me say thank you to you and your colleagues for making Geneva a stop on your European outreach. It really was a pleasure to be able to engage with you, and I thank you for taking the time. I know, we have such a breadth of engagement in Canada across the ecosystem. But it's always wonderful when folks stop by to see my team, but me in particular, frankly. So thank you for taking the time. I really, part of what I love most about my job is to kind of engage with the outside world and the folks that we're doing this for, frankly, and the businesses that we're doing this for. So thanks for taking the time. On your question, maybe first a general statement. I'll go into a little bit of the specifics that you highlighted, and then I'll kind of give maybe a so what at the end. And and I think that the general statement that I want to make, because I think it's important to keep this in mind, and you rightly, noted that there have been some positive developments, or some encouraging developments, with regards to our engagement vis-a-vis the EU. Um, so the general statement is this: Canada and the EU are nearly completely aligned in terms of our overall objective when it comes to the agri environmental agenda, right? We are both, and you know this better than I do, Erin, we are both, and Canada in particular, I would say, is very committed to our climate change objectives. We're committed to being ambitious with those objectives. We're committed and are investing. We're putting our money where our mouth is with regards to those objectives. And we're making it a priority. And I would say that we're, frankly, going above and beyond and winning very much so, with regards to those priorities and those objectives. Specifically, I would say Canada is deeply committed to pollinator health and to protecting our forests. And I say those two things because there are two of the issues that you raised. And so I would say that while the general statement is that Canada and the EU are almost completely aligned, there are specifically issues where we continue to have a difference of opinion and a different view with regards to how we meet those objectives and what are the most appropriate, the least restrictive, and the most dependable, and sustainable way to meet those overall objectives. And part of it, frankly, is around making sure that our objectives are broadly in line, both from an environmental perspective, but also from an innovation perspective, and also from a business perspective. Um, and we spoke about this when you were in Geneva, but for the benefit of your listeners, we continue to engage with the EU, and try and drive home to them the fact that part of what we are trying to do at the WTO is to ensure that regulations that are put in place are done in a way that makes sense for the entire membership, are done in a way that is not trade restrictive, and frankly, is done in a way that meets the WTO rules and obligations that we have all signed up for. Um, and I think, well, I mean, you mentioned it, right? I think that there have been some successes in that regard. I think that the EU, and this is part of the beauty of the WTO, the so what piece, they have heard from over 150 members of the issues that are arising with some of the ways that they are looking to achieve their environmental objectives and their environmental goals and their goals around environmental sustainability, none of which anybody across the membership disagree with in terms of overall objectives. we all share the same objectives. We all share grosso modo the same goals. But they have now heard, and that's part of the beauty of a WTO, of a multilateral fora, that they have heard in chorus from developing to developed countries alike that some of the ways that they are looking to achieve their environmental objectives are, in many members' views, not in line with some of the rules and regulations um, based on the information that we have to date, right, are not workable for many of our businesses. Um, and also, frankly, again, based on the information that we have, aren't really going to get them any closer to the environmental objectives that they're trying to meet, right? And in fact, could do the very opposite because it could stifle innovation and stifle good business flows and trade flows. And so, listen, we continue to have the conversation, not just in the multilateral setting, although I do very biasly believe that the multilateral setting gives us a unique perspective in that regard, because you do have the chorus of members that come from very diverse backgrounds and very diverse trading. Everybody's trading makeup is different, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you hear from the Cameroons of the world and the Canadas of the world. Our trading landscapes are very different, but all of us are saying the same thing. All of us are for environmental sustainability. Most of us feel that and know, based on the information provided, that some of the ways in which the EU is trying to go about that is unworkable. And so, we will continue the conversation with them in the hopes that we can come to a place that works not just for Canada, but for the broader membership.
Thank you. Appreciate your perspective on that important topic in an important market. I want to ask you one more question on the topic related to sustainability. It's an important topic. We'll go beyond the EU now. Late last year, COP28 brought focus to the impact of climate change and the urgency of reducing and reversing global warming. Many global institutions are asking themselves now, as a result, how they can respond. Does the WTO have a role in your view? How do you see sustainability incorporated into WTO work programs or impacting the operations of the organization?
Well, listen, it wasn't too long ago, and in fact, when I was here as a delegate, I had trade and environment as one of my areas of work, and so I remember very acutely a time where trade and environment was really struggling to carve out its place at the WTO, and where many, frankly, viewed environmental issues as a non-trade concern. Uh, and I think, that is very thankfully changing, specifically as it relates to agriculture. I mean, climate is obviously no doubt of paramount importance, and I think that the effects of climate change really can't be ignored. We have more extreme weather events, we have less predictable growing seasons, we have changing pests and disease patterns. All of those things, all of these changes, and all of these transitions, it all makes it more difficult to reliably produce food. And so we know that the global food system, exerts both enormous environmental pressure, um, and we also know that it is and must continue to be part of the solution. And, the sector really globally has such a tremendous opportunity to reduce its emissions, to capture carbon, to adapt to these growing challenges. And trade and the WTO, not in my view, in Canada's view, and now in the larger membership's view, has such an important role to play. And, I like to think about um, that role kind of along three buckets, I would say. And when I think of the buckets, I think of subsidies as one bucket. I think of innovation as a second bucket, and then I think of the broad regulation frame as a third bucket. And I have to say that on this first bucket of subsidies, we often forget that at MC12, we concluded what is really the first environmental sustainability agreement at the WTO in the fisheries subsidies agreement. And people tend to forget that, right? But really and truly, it is the first environmental sustainability agreement, multilateral agreement, and it was done at the WTO. And it's all about reducing harmful subsidies for in fisheries, right? And now we're at the second stage of of a stage two agreement that's going to go even further in reducing those subsidies. And so, that's number one. And then, of course, when it comes to agriculture and subsidies, it's been Canada's long-standing view at the WTO to agree on new disciplines to reduce harmful domestic support across the agricultural field, and that has been a long, arduous slog. And I smile because if I don't smile, I might cry. Um, but I always say that hard things are hard, and sometimes when things take a long time, it's because they're infinitely meaningful, and one does have to have a little bit of patience. So that's the first bucket, right, where trade and environmental sustainability really kind of intersect in reducing those harmful subsidies. And harmful is important, right? Because not all subsidies are harmful, but reducing those harmful subsidies that we know really have a negative impact on environmental sustainability and on trade and competitiveness. And then the second bucket is of course, innovation. I mean, we all know the interplay. I mean, all of your listeners who are probably trade and agri and agri-food geeks like us understand the intersection between trade and innovation. You cannot move things from abundance to non-abundance without a trading framework, and innovation is no different than stuff. So for us, building a framework and continuing that WTO framework where folks can have discussions around what types of innovations are needed in order to combat this climate crisis, and how we can make sure that the WTO rules, that the trade rules are not an impediment to innovation, to me is of key importance and gaining more traction, frankly, amongst the deliberative discussions in the organization. And then third is that whole regulatory space. And we talked a little bit about it when we were talking about our EU friends. But the WTO really more now than ever really has to make sure that countries continue to talk, to have conversations, to share what they are doing in the regulatory space, in their own domestic regulatory spaces, because really and truly, if we are not talking to each other and having those conversations to make sure that what we are doing in the regulatory space is getting us to the benefits and the objectives that we say we are trying to achieve. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked about deforestation and pollinator health with regards to the EU's regulations, but also are not counter to the trade rules that we have all signed up to, and signed up to for good reason. And so those are kind of just three buckets that I like to think about when I think about the intersection between trade, multilateral trade in particular, and environmental sustainability. Because we know that climate change is a global problem, and so it really does require a global solution and a set of global solutions. And trade rules are part of that.
Thank you, Ambassador. Speaking of global solutions, you referenced the ministerial conference. Next month, member states are going to gather in Abu Dhabi for the 13th ministerial conference. And I'd love to know from your perspective what you see as outcomes from the conference. And maybe going into that, what are some of the main challenges that negotiators must overcome in order to deliver a meaningful package?
You know, I think, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think the main challenge is going to be for us to remember, not that we don't know it, but remember what our overall objective of this organization is. Because I have to say, having come back to the pure trade policy world and multilateralism after being away from it for so long, I had forgotten, and in particular at the WTO, and I like to think it's because we're overachievers, but I had forgotten how self-deprecating we can be, and how we can almost forget, lose the forest through the trees when we're talking about these multilateral conferences, these ministerial conferences. So in the lead up to the ministerial conference, it always becomes about, okay, what are the agreements that we're going to conclude? What is the press release going to say? What is our minister going to have to deliver? What is the ambassador going to have to say at the end of it? And listen, that is very important. Concrete outcomes in the form of concluded agreements are absolutely one pillar of the WTO's work. There's no doubt about it. We are here in part to negotiate rules. And as things evolve, you need to create new rules to deal with the changing landscapes of the global trading system. 100%. All about it. And we also have to remember that part of what is important at the WTO and part of why we do this work is that we understand that the WTO is the only place where 163 members come together to talk about the forward agenda for the global trading system. It's the only place, the only forum where we have the opportunity to take that long-term view of where, not where the puck is, but where the puck is going, and really start to build the foundations to ensure that we are set up for success for the future global trading system and the global landscape. And that is, in my view, just as important as anything else. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of that. And so, Canada and my particular goal going into MC13 is 100% to drive as hard as we can towards the negotiating areas that we have been working hard on throughout the entire, since the last ministerial and even before that. Agriculture, fish, absolutely 100%. It is also my very clear goal to remember and to engage with the membership on deliberative discussions around issues of importance in the global trading system so that we ensure that the WTO is set up for success. At MC12, that was called the Reform Agenda. It was all about how the WTO needs to evolve and change in order to be set up for the future. And this is the first ministerial since we kind of set out on this reform agenda. And so for MC13, I really do hope that we carve out time to really dig into those issues and have those deliberative discussions on issues like climate, on issues like environmental sustainability, on issues like the changing geopolitical context and what that means for the trading system, and how we ensure that the membership and our populations within our membership continue to understand the importance of trade, to understand the importance of a rules-based trading system. All of those issues, to me, are equally as important as driving forward on rules-based negotiations. We need to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. And if we are able to do that, to me, that will be a huge success of the ministerial.
All very important topics that benefit from a broader global discussion, but some would suggest that multilateralism is in crisis. How would you respond to that sentiment?
Oh boy. Well, listen, I always think it's very unhelpful when people raise legitimate, good faith concerns, and the answer is, "Oh, you just don't understand. You're not in it, so you don't get it." So I will not say that, because look, there is no doubt about it, that our landscape, um, globally is changing. Um, to ignore that fact is foolish. Um, and so we can't, right? Um, we talked a little bit about it already, climate change, disruptive technologies, the need for different types of innovation, increased innovation, pandemics, supply chain disruptions, wars happening around the world. Not just the ones that are gaining attention on our news feeds, which are legitimate and very important. But I'm always reminded in multilateral settings that there are so many conflicts going on around the world that don't gain at least my attention. And so that is absolutely part of it. Growing inequalities around the world, right? It used to be that we just talked about growing inequalities in the developing world or the global south or whatever phrase you'd like to call it, but they're really growing inequalities in all of our countries, frankly. And declining democracies, a rise in protectionism that look very different than the rise in protectionism that we knew 20 years ago, that in many cases are much closer to home than we would probably like. Um, you know, Polycrisis is, I think, now becoming kind of a buzzword, um, but it's not inaccurate. Frankly, it's not an inaccurate descriptor in my view. And so those are real. And does that affect multilateralism? Does that affect the ability for countries to agree in a multilateral setting? Does it affect a multilateral fora where consensus is the way that we come to agreement? We don't vote at the WTO. I like to remind people of that. Absolutely, it does. Um, and I also think that we can't ignore, um, the shifting global power dynamics and power competitions that are really changing the game when we talk about multilateralism. And in particular, when we talk about global economic governance and global trade. Um, there's this ongoing debate whether we're moving from a unipolar world to a bipolar, a two-polar world, or a multipolar world. And I think that the debate really is indicative of the fact that it's not really that simple. I think that most countries, in particular, these kind of newly emerged middle powers, so to speak. I don't know if that's the right phraseology for it, but the newly emerged middle powers. Um, I think that it's more of a kind of a multi-alignment situation, a multi-alignment world, where these emerging markets, newly middled powers, are not really they don't want to align themselves in one camp or another, in particular. They want to have the ability, the latitude to pursue their interests as they see fit on any given issue. And they don't want to be wedded to one camp or another in perpetuity. Um, and they're also more vocal about wanting a bigger, a greater, a more meaningful role in setting the global agenda. And so that also affects multilateralism. That also affects, how we set the rules for trade, the issues that we talk about, that we engage on. And it absolutely makes consensus harder. Um, To me, where I have trouble is to then leap to the conclusion that therefore we are in a crisis with regards to multilateralism. Because to me, that is indicative of the need to have more multilateral conversations. And that is indicative of the importance of the multilateral system and multilateral fora. Um, I think it's needed more and not less when you think about all of the challenges, because I think, how do we deal with uncertainty? How do we deal with instability? It's through relationships, right? It's through those conversations. And I think that, like I said before, global problems need global solutions, and multilateral fora is really the only place that you are able to have those conversations and build those relationships, if we're doing it properly, in a very holistic way, in a way that allows you to see and engage with countries on a range of issues and understand more holistically their challenges, their opportunities, where we can align, where we're not aligned, in order to move forward and solve some of our most wicked problems. So that's where I have the challenge. Absolutely, there are problems. Like I said at the top, transitions are always lots of wonderful, but also lots of difficult. So the global transitions that we're going through, absolutely there are difficulties, but um, I think making the leap to say that we're in crisis with regards to multilateralism, while I am empathetic to those and those views, um, I take a much different approach, and I really think it just means that we need to kind of dig in deeper, and fight harder, frankly, for the system.
Well, I'm grateful that we've had the opportunity to ask you that question in this forum, because I think very often there's this sort of perception of reality. And then there's having an opportunity to talk to someone who's working on from the inside to give us a real sense of some of the challenges that you're facing, and to suggest that this isn't a crisis, but a time when things are becoming increasingly challenging, and a time when multilateral forums are needed now more than ever.
And can I say, Erin, sorry, not to belabor, but I just thought of something I think is also important. We always talk about the kind of big challenges and concluding big agreements and coming to consensus, but I also have to remind folks that part of the day-to-day multilateral work, and I kind of talked about it a little bit when we were talking about the ministerial conference coming up at the end of February, but part of the multilateral work is the day-to-day, um, in the WTO, committee work that we undertake as a delegation, right? That's not done by me, that's done by my teams across all the issue areas, that frankly, no matter what is going on in the world, largely happen and continue uninterrupted and with great success. And you never hear about that because they managed to solve those problems with little fanfare, right? And I think that that's also important to realize as well, that, along with the big, hairy issues that rise to the top of the pile, are these kind of the everyday work that happens at the multilateral level, in a multilateral setting, that is equally, if not more important, frankly, and often continues uninterrupted, regardless of what's going on in the world.
Appreciate that. The steady and consistent work that continues despite some of the
Exactly.
political challenges that we hear a lot more about. So that's an important
Exactly.
reminder. Thank you for adding that to your response. Coming back maybe briefly with respect to the free trade agreements that you referenced, in recent years, Canada has concluded free trade agreements with most of our largest agricultural trading partners. In your view, what are the three most important contributions of the WTO to international trade and to Canada?
Well, that's a good question. Um, well, maybe I would say three things, and we've touched a little bit on them, throughout the conversation, so they probably won't come as a surprise to folks listening. But I would say that number one, is disciplining subsidies. And that's probably not a surprise because we've talked about it already in the context of our fisheries negotiations, and in particular in the agriculture negotiations as well. Um, you know, Disciplining subsidies with regards to harmful subsidies with regards to agriculture and in the context of the WTO agreement on agriculture um, is an issue where, frankly, only the WTO, only a multilateral forum is going to be meaningful. You can't do it bilaterally. You can't even do it regionally, plurilaterally. It really is the single biggest contribution that the WTO has made and can continue to make with regards to safeguarding our trading system. And so to me, that would be top in terms of contribution. Second, again, we talked about it a little bit in the previous response, all of the review and committee work, all of the transparency work. Again, not sexy, doesn't get any headlines, nobody talks about it. It's the day-to-day work that the teams do in all of the SPS committees, all of the TBT committee work, all of the committee work across all of the negotiating areas, which is really about after the rules are agreed on, how do you make sure that people understand the rules, that people are abiding by the rules, that as domestic policies evolve, that the rules are still fit for purpose? All of that is done in the day-to-day committee work. And all of that is done through transparency work. And by transparency, for those who might not be familiar with the lingo, it's really about countries being open and reporting on new policies, new regulations, new regulatory frameworks, new bilateral or plurilateral trade agreements that they've concluded, and being transparent and bringing those forward to the membership in those different committees. And so members can have conversations around them and have a chance to unpack them and make sure that they are consistent with the trading rules, or that they don't bring up new issues that need to be further discussed. And so to me, that's the only way that we can actually make sure that the agreements continue to mean something, right? Is if we are steadfast in that committee work. And then again, third, and we talked a little bit about it when we were talking about MC13. It's a forum for discussing new and emerging issues. Part of the criticism that the WTO has gotten in more recent years is that it's not in touch with what matters. It's not in touch with what matters to people. It's not in touch with what matters to business. It's not in touch with what matters to policymakers. And I think that part of that criticism is because, like I said before, we're very loud and proud and ambitious with regards to negotiating rules, but we're not very loud about all of the conversations that we have and all of the what we call in our lingo deliberative work that we do around these new and emerging issues. Conversations on trade and environment, like Canada is the co-chair along with Costa Rica on the trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions, what we call the TESD. And that's all about a forum for members to come and share information on best practices, on policies that they are implementing, on challenges that they have around trade and environmental sustainability, and all that that means. From circularity to carbon pricing to subsidies, right? To have conversations, not negotiate rules, but to actually have conversations and to really talk about again where the puck is going. And so I think that that is also really a contribution that the WTO has made, but needs to kind of step our game up a little bit on. Because again, if, I always say to folks, and somebody for sure said it before me, but if the WTO didn't exist, we would need to create it. And I think that part of why we would need to create it is because there are these wicked issues that that are intersectional, that are cross-cutting, and that are global in nature. Um, and we, as folks committed to a rules based order, to a rules based trading system, need to ensure that we are having those conversations around those issues so we can make sure that we're not part of the problem, but that we also become part of the solution. So that would be the third thing that I would say.
Thank you. Maybe before I move on to a couple of closing questions around specifically around your legacy and leadership, I want to ask you one more question about the role that Canada can play in all of this. And when I say Canada, maybe I'm thinking a bit about the work that you and your team are doing at the WTO. And I'm thinking about the work that industry and associations and the role that they can play. So I would welcome your perspective. When you've got 164 member states, what does Canada do, in your view, to be the most impactful, to make a difference?
I would say that Canada has always been seen as a bridge builder at the WTO. Um, and we continue to play that role. We are a member that is ambitious, but also very practical. And I think that that combination of ambition, of driving people to a high standard, no matter what, frankly, but also practical in understanding that sometimes that means that it's a long game, is valued because, none too often people get caught up in the immediate. People can easily get caught up in the short termness of some issues. And I think that Canada being a voice at the table to say, whoa, 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 like, let's make sure that we're not unraveling rules here as we try and do you know, something like environmental sustainability, for example. Let's make sure that in trying to do things that are very laudable and that are important and that we are doing too, that we don't lose sight of the long game, right? That we don't unravel rules, that we don't lower our ambition or water down things to a point where it becomes unworkable for our business, or it becomes unsaleable at home for our people, because it doesn't work and it creates more inequities than not. We have always been that voice of reason at the table, and we've also always been. And we talked a little bit about it when we were talking about our conversations with the EU. We've always been a member that has tried to really understand the diversity of the membership at the WTO and think about ways that we can bridge very different trading landscapes, very different domestic realities, and merge those into something that works for everybody and that maintains that high standard that we are looking for. And I think that has gotten us very far. It has made us a trusted partner. Our work through the Ottawa Group
Mhm.
on reform, in particular, has made us a trusted partner. Um, and I would also say, and in particular, in the lead up to ministerial conferences, uh, Canada's um, pleasure at doing the roll up your sleeves, head down, pen to paper, technical work that is needed to actually move negotiations forward. That again doesn't necessarily make headlines, might not be in a press release anywhere, but was fundamental to getting to success. Um, is appreciated and is needed, and I think that, and I hope, actually, my hope really is that Canada never loses that muscle, that ability to not necessarily be driven by the bright shiny objects, but by the real roll up your sleeves work, practical work, hard work that needs to get done in order to really reach real meaningful agreements and disciplines that work for our country and for the broader membership.
I think what really stood out for me in the conversation that we had when we were with you in Geneva, and today's conversation has reinforced, is your appreciation for and understanding of the issues that are facing Canada's agriculture sector. And for that, we're very grateful to have an ambassador who is there on our behalf and has a true understanding of some of the challenges facing our trade dependent industry. So I'm grateful
Exactly.
for that. Thank you. I
You're
want to
very
close with a
welcome.
couple of questions. You accepted this position 18 months ago. I'm not sure how much longer do you have in your term.
Oh, hopefully a long time.
Okay, so there isn't a set limit.
There is.
Okay.
It's supposed to be 4 years. I will make the pitch here that everybody before me has done 5 years, and so to anyone listening, it is 4 years, usually with the ability to extend for an extra year, if it works out. So yeah, yeah.
So when you have a level of enthusiasm, obviously, for this work and for this posting in particular, and so when you think about what it meant for you to come into this role, and you when you move out of this role and you reflect on some of the work that you were doing in this capacity, talk a bit about what you'd hoped your legacy might be through this work.
Yeah, the like legacy, that it's such a hard word for me. And in particular, in the multilateral space and in the trade policy space in particular, and coming back to it after kind of being out of the core of it for so long, I'm reminded of that because so much of the work is building on what your predecessors did, right? Again, these are long goal, long game conversations. Um, and I remember folks saying back in the day, if you're lucky, you'll get to be the one that inks something, right? I mean, and it really is luck because it's such a long game business, trade negotiations, and in particular multilateralism. And so I always have to remind myself to not forget that. My predecessor, Stephen DeBoer, who again was here for 5 years and is now the deputy minister and the advisor to the prime minister on foreign policy and security issues. He did so much work to move the fish negotiations forward. He did so much work on the trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions. He did so much work to move us forward on reform. And so all of kind of the gains that I'm seeing now, absolutely, part of my legacy and part of the work that myself and the amazing team is doing, but is also part of Stephen's legacy too, right? I mean, he really has built that foundation, and his predecessor, Jonathan Freed, did a lot of work to set it up, right? And so I always think about when I leave, I hope that my successor can at least say that I set things up for her or him, to continue those successes. Um, and I also hope that the folks that I got the opportunity to work with, in particular, my immediate team at the mission, kind of will remember an atmosphere of collegiality, an atmosphere of Team Canada, of really kind of putting a priority on reaching out to stakeholders, a priority of reaching out across governments, at the federal level, at the provincial level. Um, to me, that'll be my legacy, to make sure that Canada is held in the highest regard that it always has been, after I leave.
I have a personal interest in leadership, having studied the topic as part of my graduate degree, and I think that increasingly these unprecedented challenges that you're talking about require unprecedented leadership. And so I want to close all of my conversations by asking my guests to weigh in on the subject. And so my question to you, Ambassador, is this. After reflecting on your extensive experience, can you tell me a bit about an influential leader whose mentorship has inspired you or informed the way in which you show up as a leader today?
Ooh. Well, I will say, and folks who have heard me on different podcasts won't be surprised about this. There have been, listen, I have to say, there have been many people. And so I choose this one person not because they are the only people. I have to say it because whenever I do these podcasts and somebody asks me this question, I always get messages from many people to say, "How come you didn't say me?" You know, jokingly, obviously, but there have been many people. But I really have to say, Kirsten Hillman, who is now Ambassador Hillman, who is our ambassador to the United States, and I was her 2IC on the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. And it was a trifecta. It was the first time that we decided to have two deputy chief negotiators. So it was Kirsten as the chief negotiator, Ambassador Hillman as the chief negotiator, and Denis Carrière, who is now since retired, as one deputy chief negotiator, and then myself as the second deputy chief negotiator. And I have to say um, that Kirsten really was a leader that, not for the first time, again, not for the first time, but one of the first times, who really taught me the importance, and what it looked and felt like when somebody was for you, when somebody was committed to you as a leader, when somebody, was really committed to making you a better leader. Because for whatever reason, she decided that she was going to be that person for me. Um, and you can feel the difference, frankly. And I still, and not, that was a long time ago. I mean, it's not even TPP anymore, right? Like that was a very, very long time ago. Um, and we knew each other from before. We were actually posted in Geneva together the first time around. She was the legal counselor when I was the environment and TBT, and what did I do? TBT, environment, and something else, government procurement counselor. But as my boss, really and truly, she taught me what it's like when people give you feedback. My mother used to say to me in high school, be careful who you give your energy to, because not everybody wants you to succeed. And she used to say that to me when I would, like, complain about little arguments that I had with a friend, or like talk about, something that happened at school or whatever. And after having worked with Kirsten, it became quite evident when people give you feedback from a place of wanting you to succeed and giving you feedback because they want you to be better, versus giving you feedback because, it might be about their ego, or it might be about, not really understanding what your particular style is, or wanting you to be more like them and not like you, or, for different other reasons. And so I would say, Ambassador Hillman was really that, a person that to me taught me a lot about leadership, a lot about leadership. And I have to say, so that I don't get an email, that there was somebody else that brought me to her, that put me forward for that position,
Mhm.
because I was on mat leave at the time. And that person as well, again, was somebody who thought, well, so what? She's on mat leave. Maybe she'll want the job. Ask her. I'm sure people. What I learned later was that people thought, well, she's not going to want this job. It's going to be impossible. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of travel. She just had a baby.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this person, who is a man, um, an older man, yeah, said, well, have you asked her? Because she'd be great. And lo and behold, they asked me, and then I interviewed for it, and the rest is history, frankly. And so, again, it is a series of people, oftentimes. but I always, whenever I get the chance, have to give Kirsten, Ambassador Hillman, her flowers because she deserves them.
And maybe finally, what are you still working on? I mean, this is a journey. We never attain perfection when you think about the leadership role that you have today and those that you'll have in the future. What is one area where you continue to strive for improvement?
There are so many, but I would say my biggest, the biggest area is not caring what people think about you. Folks, especially, well, maybe not especially, I can only talk from, from who I am and my identities. For all the women out there who are in male-dominated fields, Erin, you might have views on this too. My one piece of advice is to try and let go of the innate desire, at least that I have had and sometimes continue to have and struggle with, of really, caring what other people think, what other people are going to say, what other people might think about how you do things differently, how you show up. It really, it can get you so far, but then afterwards, you really have to let it go to really kind of reach your full potential of leadership and really make kind of the fundamental change in terms of organizational change and organizational leadership that we say that we want. We talk a lot about how the world is changing, the work world is changing, our employees want different things, even the leadership teams want different things, but that requires a different type of leadership, which requires letting go of that fear of doing things differently, and the fear of perhaps not everybody getting it at the start, or maybe not ever, right? And really trying to forge ahead when you know that you're trying to do something different, but something good. So I'm still working on it.
Amen. Me too. I'm realizing that one comes with experience and maturity and age. As
Yes,
I get older, I realize
yes,
I care
yes,
increasingly less and less. So
yeah.
appreciate that perspective. This has been a tremendous conversation. You've been very generous with your time, and for that, we're very grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Erin. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
My thanks to the ambassador for her time and perspective. I hope that you found this episode as thought-provoking and inspiring as I did. Remember, these fireside chats with Erin are monthly, so mark your calendars. We'll be back in February with another great conversation. You can connect with us through X at CDA Grains Council to stay up to date on all of the work that we're doing. And stay connected with us for more engaging conversations that delve into the heart of the grain industry. You can catch us on your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Just search for Fireside Chats with Erin and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next time.